So my next project is to paint this eagle's head onto this piece of Bristol board. I've already taken the photo reference and sized it to the same size as the board in a photo editing software, and I've changed the values and the contrast levels to a point where I think it's more appealing. So the next step in the process is to actually transfer the image onto the panel that we'll be painting. To do that, I'm going to use a tried and true method of using a paper cut mask. Using a paper mask or a paper stencil is nothing new. This has been around for a long time. But if you're not familiar with the process, here's how I approach it. For this specific painting, I'm going to use 2 printouts of the photographic image. You can use as few as 1 or as many as you like. It just depends on how much detail you want to put into the mask to begin with. So you might notice that this one is darker than this one because this is the original photograph that I chose to use as a reference. This one I have altered the contrast levels in order to lighten it up, brighten it up, make it more appealing in my eyes. So for this one, the darker image, we'll cut it out first, and I'm going to use it specifically for the outline of the bird's head so that I can render the background later on. So with an X-Acto knife, number 11 blade, all I'm going to do is cut out the outline of this bird. And for the beak, I'm not trying to use jagged edges. A smooth cut is all I'm looking for. Some people like to kind of wiggle the knife back and forth so that you don't get a really smooth, sharp line. I know that I'm going to be using erasers and other tools to add and subtract paint during the painting process, so a sharp line is not going to affect the end result. And again, I'm just cutting the outline of this bird out. Now on the back side of this, where you can see the feathers taper off, I'm not doing just a continuous straight line. I am using the knife to cut out some of this feathered texture. And this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just a guideline. I'm not using this as a mask where I lay it down and spray through it and voila, we're done. This is just to give me a roadmap during the painting process. And again, under this beak, there's some very faint feathers or hairs coming down off of it. I'll try to get some of these in, but it's not absolutely imperative to get them in there. And the reason why I used the darker printout for the outline of the bird is because the beak area is a little bit better defined than it is in the lighter version. When you go to remove it, if you missed a few spots, you might have to go back in and clean some of these cuts up. You can spend as much time on this as you prefer. Like I said, I use this just as a roadmap, basic guide to put me where I want to be during the painting process. So I don't put a lot of detail in there, but that'll give me a way to mask off the head of the bird when I'm painting it and be able to lightly mist in some of the background. So for the other printout, now I'll go in and hit some more details. And basically the way I do this is I try to get all of the very dark areas like the pupil, the outer portion of the eye, a little bit of the brow, some of the beak, the nose, some of these dark areas in the feathers, and that will give me the roadmap that I need. That'll give me the guide during the airbrush process so that I know where details need to go. And the rest of it, we'll just kind of keep an eye on the reference as we're painting, and we'll go from there. So I'll begin by cutting out the center of the pupil. And I find if you turn the paper, when you're cutting a round object, it makes it a little bit easier to get a smoother cut. But again, at this stage, I'm not too concerned about having this super smooth. I'll try to keep this highlight in here, but I'm not 100% certain that will work out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. This is pretty small. And again, there's some texture at the end of these little feathers right above the eye that we'll put in later. I'm not worried about trying to cut little jagged lines in there. I just cut a straight line across here because this is just the road map. This is going to get our painting started. It's not meant to put minute details into it. You can do that if that's the way you want to do it. It takes more time to go in and cut out all these little bitty fine details. But if you're willing to spend that time, by all means do so. And keep in mind with the center, we want to keep the pupil and this outer end black, and that's what I'm removing is the very dark areas, but I can't cut all the way around the eye or I'll lose the center of it. So we'll have to leave a little void and come back in with the airbrush and just add that later. Oops. See what I mean? That little bit of that highlight just got knocked out, but that's okay. Again, I'm just looking for the very darkest areas and removing those areas. Missed a slight portion of the eye. There we go. And I'll add a few little random dark spots in the feathers just to give myself a reference while I'm painting. You can see that's just a sliver. Again, you can put as much of this detail in here as you want or need. It's completely up to you as the artist. If you're a little bit newer to airbrushing, it may be easier to put a lot of detail into it. If you've got more experience, then you may not need as much detail. This area right here, just below and to the left of the eye, I'm just kind of making little random cuts. Which may or may not open up enough when there's air going through the paper mask to actually put paint onto the surface, but we'll try it and see. Then for the beak, the lower portion of it. Because I want to leave a separation where the beaks close, I'm going to try and cut just a sliver around where we cut just a minute ago. Which may not be necessary in the end, but it seems like a good idea at the moment. A lot of this fades off into lighter shades of gray, so I don't want to get too carried away. And for that, because it fades off into lighter shades of gray in this area, I don't want to just completely cut all this out, because when I go to airbrush in there, it'll leave me a very hard edge even if I spray lightly in this area. So what I'm going to try to do is just fold this up. If I can get everything cut. By leaving this folded up, it'll give me a softer edge when I spray a little bit of paint in there. Again, for this area of the feathers, I'm cutting pretty kind of just random lines to give myself some more jagged portion of the stencil, because this is all feather and hair. Build a little bit of texture with the stencil from the beginning. I'm not going for photorealism with this painting. It'll be realistic in the end if everything works out all right. I'm not worried about trying to paint it exactly like what I see in the photographic reference. So I'm not trying to be extremely exact with these cuts or anything. This is just the roadmap. Sometimes making these straight line, numerous cuts like that, it's hard to find where they intersect and where they don't when you're trying to remove the paper. Sometimes I'll just grab it and try to tear like that. Which will give you a little bit of not a straight edge as well, versus trying to just cut it all with the X-Acto blade. Again, this is just for the roadmap, very beginning of the painting process. Again, basically all I'm trying to do is get a sense for where the very darkest darks are. Maybe some of the mid-tones. That one's more of a mid-tone there, but it'll give me an idea of where that feather actually begins. Same with these. And I'll do the same thing that I did with the beak above with these particular feathers. Let's just roll that up so I don't get a super hard edge at the top when I paint that. Roll that one back. You see, I'm just getting the very darkest areas in between some of these feathers. That'll just give me a better idea when I start the painting process how to render the direction of the feathers, give me a better idea of where they're at. Again, you can put as much detail in these as you want. If you want to do one stencil with all the very dark areas and then a separate stencil with the more of the midtones, you can do that. And you'll see even when I begin to spray paint through this stencil onto the substrate to begin with, I'm going to do a very, very light pass. So even though these are the darkest of the darks that I'm mapping out, they will not start out extremely dark in the actual painting. Because again, this is just my roadmap. And I think that's probably good enough to get us started. I might just knock a few little holes right here where the fur begins to creep in around the beak. And I'm just picking at the paper now just to tear little holes in it. I'm not actually cutting lines like we have been. That'll give me just an indication of where all those little feathers and fur begin. I think that's probably good. So from here, we'll go back to the easel and we'll get started. I realized that was not exactly riveting to watch. It took a little bit longer than I had anticipated, so if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And that should give you a pretty good idea of the approach I use when cutting a paper mask or a paper stencil for the purpose of transferring an image onto the surface that I'm painting. It's a great alternative, especially if your drawing skills are not quite at the level that you'd like them to be. It's not an excuse not to improve your drawing skills. I'm a strong advocate of improving your drawing skills. Improving your drawing skills will improve your art across the board, and that includes your airbrush paintings. Because this took a little bit longer than I had anticipated, I decided to split this video into two parts. So next Saturday, we'll look at actually using the airbrush to transfer the image onto the Bristol board through the paper stencil. So once again, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Remember to like, subscribe, and share if you got something out of this, and I'll see you guys next week.